the relationship between carbs and my best workout performances. So now over the years I did keto, I did low carb, I did also high carb growing up, I would say. Now the question is, what maximizes my overall health the most? And the question is also not only what maximizes my overall health, maybe also in the long term the most, but also my short-term mental performance. Now, ideally also then the long and mid and long-term performance. So, first of all of the runs that I have had in the last couple of years that were really good were usually done on carbs. And so I've tried for years now that to bring basically the efficiency of the fat process, also maybe gluconeogenesis, which is the process of making new glycogen by using fat stores. I've tried to basically teach my body to use more fat. Now, recently I also saw something by Thomas de Lauer where he did a VO2 max test, and he apparently had a higher fat utilization at a given speed, at least compared to the average, for example. And so I've also followed Thomas de Lauer for quite some time. And many of the ideas I had about keto, about low carb, were kind of copy-pasted from him, I would say. Now, I also experienced over the years, especially on the lower carb side, many instances where I was very, very weak. And so in the last couple of weeks, I more or less incidentally, maybe my body stirred me towards it, I began again having more and more carbs. And now, of course, there are different kinds of carbs. There could be something like lentils, there could be something like beans, there could be something like just grains. And there could also be many other factors which might sometimes be, basically, if I have a given carb source, there might be additional factors which might then limit how useful this carb source is to me. So I might begin to not be able to distinguish between carbs as well as this other factor. This other factor could be that I'm intolerant maybe to certain things. Maybe I have a predisposition for something like gluten or something else. It seems to be that after the consumption of beans, for example, my digestion does not particularly well, or does not really adjust. And also I've tried now eating lentils for now years, and sometimes it works, or it seems, or I can't remember, and I don't have sufficient notes or data on this. Now, if I go back to this, and especially back to the last couple of weeks, what it seems is that if I ate carbs, especially like large amounts of carbs, and I also have to say that tracking my calories now for the last, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks, and also beginning to then eat carbs again. I'm quite shocked at just how much I eat. Now this also already begins to show, I think. I do already have more body fat, but the question is whether this is due to the carbs or due to the combination of carbs with often fats. So recently, for example, I bought protein bread at the grocery store. I just initially wanted to try out how I could, when I'm on the road basically, just go to a grocery store and just without so many constraints, just buy random things, and ideally also would have some decent macronutrients, or a decent macronutrient split. That's what I'm trying to say, mostly focusing on protein, then a little bit of fat and a little bit of carbs. Now, what also comes with, at least it seems that the foods or the nutrients that go into a protein bread that is also then vegetarian are often also foods that are high in fat. So the combination then of having something like 10 to 20 grams of carbs in the protein bread plus 10 grams almost of fat in there is then a combination that my body doesn't necessarily need. So the fat is basically over providing energy in this case. And now there might be so many different things, and also nutrition in general might, I think, not be very. I have at least heard this a couple of times, that nutrition, because the genetic profiles, and not necessarily the genetic profiles, but some people just can eat these foods and are tolerating these foods well, and others cannot do the same foods, and so on and so forth. And there might be, this whole thing is maybe just way too complex to understand as a average human, if not going into this. And then there are so many different things, just maybe remembering what the different amino acids are. I maybe can name 3, and that's about it. So even though I have been into this into this topic for a couple of years at this point in time. So if I now take a look at my workout intensity. And I would say, okay, if I rate all of the workouts on a scale from 1 to 3, with 1 being a very bad workout to maybe a reasonable workout, with 2 being okay, and 3 being very good. A workout where I was like, oh yeah, this was a good workout. Now, almost all of the 3 workouts are, I would say, there's basically no workout, almost no workout. I would say at least 50 to 75% of all the 3 workouts happened after I ingested large amounts of carbs before. Now, I would say that the 2 workouts can happen also on a low carb or a ketogenic diet. Now, this could be anywhere from, in my case, 50 grams of carbs to maybe also 300 grams of carbs a day, but not so much like 800 grams of carbs or something. Regarding the shocking effect of, okay, how much I'm actually eating, on some days it's like 5,000 calories, and just as of this evening I went to the grocery store, and a couple of days ago I was like, okay, or my parts of my body were like, okay, how about bread again? And so I bought a bread and I ate all of the kilogram of the bread basically in one instance, which were 2,000 calories. Now, I also now went on an additional run, and well, what I wanted to say with this is that the carbs, now, on a low carb or a ketogenic diet, there are also these 2 workouts, but they happen at very specific points during the day. So it has to be basically once in a full moon or in a blue moon, I don't know what the proper phrase is, kind of situation that a very good workout occurs in a state in which I am lower on the carb side or lower, or maybe even on the ketogenic side. Most of it seems to, so basically there seems to be, so this process of gluconeogenesis, I would assume, and I also didn't really find out something much about this. It seems to be the case that, or it would seem, at least based on rational thinking done by me, is that if I'm running, for example, that the body does not do so much gluconeogenesis. But if I'm then resting, for example, it would make more sense that it does. So if we have stress on a scale from 0 to 100, and it would make the most sense, it seems, that the body in low stress states has kind of more time and energy, or at least it is not as stressed, which means it can actually then focus on replenishing muscle glycogen. But it would also make sense, I think, that if I now am not eating that many carbs, that my body is just not prioritizing filling up the glycogen stores so much. If one compares these 2 situations, in one, the body needs to do this additional process, and the body has to do lots of things all the time, I assume at least. Like, okay, I'm now going on a run, I'm now trying to do this mental work, I'm now doing this and this and this and this. And if now there's an additional process, it's like getting shipped, let's say, lots of cartridges, boxes, and they are already, so either you can basically, let's just say the body gets either cartridges in which are basically still in the full container form, or let's just say the body gets a container full of things that are in there, and then it has to unpack them, it has to open up doors, it has to quality control them maybe, and then it has to bring them in, and then it has to open up the boxes, and that's just this giant task. And instead, what the body also could get is just the same amount of energy, let's just say, but it's also a container worth of volume, but it's just something it can use right away. And it already, while digesting, already can enter into the bloodstream and basically provide already nutrients, or in this case glycogen, for replenishing muscle glycogen. It seems to be the case that if I would receive this container, I just would take it, but I would maybe put it onto the side, but I would focus on the thing that's already bringing me a benefit right now. And if one needs to choose now between those 2, the body chooses between those 2, or if the body is given one, that it would make sense that it would just not very prioritize the unpacking of this thing, because it's just an additional task. Similar to how one might work in a restaurant and there is just, okay, this and this, but I just need to make sure that the customer, for example, is served, and the unpacking of these things in the back of the store are just not very high in priority right now. Maybe until we run out of, let's just say, pizza dough, then we need to unpack all of these things, but up until then, maybe not so much. So it would make sense that the body would only do these things, like gluconeogenesis, if it actually has time for it. And so it doesn't prioritize them, which then might explain the effect, or then might explain multiple effects. First of all, I'm able to contract my muscles much harder, and my muscles also feel much harder. I also began to measure this as of the last couple of days, because now I am able to, because now for the first time I can kind of measure this. So the best proxy for overall strength seems to be grip strength, and so I have a dynamometer, which is a thing you can press down on. And usually for the last couple of weeks, also more on a low-carb diet, I would say, often relying on mostly protein, vegan protein, and also other things as source, or as the main ingredient for my meal shakes. I often had a grip strength of both hands kind of evenly distributed of maybe 40 to 43, maybe a 44. I already measured a grip strength of 45 back a year ago or something like this. And now, as of the last couple of days, I measured once when I just felt very strong. I felt like I could contract my back, and then I also went on a run, and this run was just ridiculous. It just completely blew all of the previous runs, all of the last week's previous runs out of the water in terms of how first of all, how good it also felt. I wanted to run. My body wanted to run. It's like, yes, I want to run, and I want to run faster. Whereas often on the low carb or ketogenic side, it's just this big thing, this run, and also mentally it's this big thing, because if I don't perform well, then my VO2 max estimate reduces, and my VO2 max estimate is kind of the best predictor about how long I am gonna live, at least how long I'm gonna live given the controllable variable of increasing my VO2 max. And so it's kind of my responsibility. And so now, and this run, as of last Sunday, for example, it just felt easier. It didn't necessarily feel it felt at the same time easier, but I also know that the intensity of it was quite hard, actually, compared to these other runs where it often would feel very hard, but the resulting intensity would not be very hard. So one could say it was mentally very demanding, but didn't result in a very good output. Now, also I had a strength training on last Friday, and then also on Saturday, and for the first time I actually have had on multiple muscle groups, actually kind of very but noticeable muscle aches, sore muscle groups, which also now hasn't usually happened in the last couple of weeks, maybe even months. So this was also a kind of extraordinary situation. On top of the situation, or on top of this comes that as well as on Friday as on Saturday, so both kind of strength training workouts, I hit PRs on almost all of the machines. So I was like, okay, the weight I used in the last couple of weeks and months, I just take the next weight, and then I begin my drop set. I just with one stack, one of the weight stacks more, or something like this. And so this was also kind of interesting to see. Now, of course, if I do have a given energy amount, then I am kind of replacing with the carbs something else. This might be protein, this might also be fat, but I mean, what is the utility of fat really? Now, of course, now there are these potentially mental benefits, also maybe other benefits of the ketogenic diet, also maybe supposedly there are so many things, and I don't really know how to put them into proper language. So it seems to be the case that carbs, or at least the carbs image, has not gone down very well in the last couple of years, and also my own view of these. And this might also be due to something else, or due to other variables. I now just want to mention a few of them. So one of them is that if I now eat a large amount of carbs, let's just say I eat a kilogram of bread, as I did 2 hours ago. Now, this kilogram of bread now also stores water, because the glycogen is stored with water. So now if I don't drink like 2 liters for a kilogram of bread, then Now there's also water in the bread compared to, let's just say, flour. But if I now have, if I have something that is fatty and also rich in protein, then I don't need to draw in as much additional water, because I also don't fill up my glycogen stores. So if I now have something, or at least visibly, it's just my muscle bellies are just like fuller, a similar effect to creatine, but compared to how much my muscle bellies actually fill up if I'm on carbs, if my muscle bellies are actually properly filled with carbs, the creatine effect almost seems well, at least less compared to the other effect of my muscle bellies just being filled up with carbs or glycogen. So back to a couple of variables. So first of all, if I ingest carbs, hydration might become a limitational thing. The same is true for taking lots of creatine that also draws in water. So if I took a lot of creatine before a workout, I often notice that so there is this contrary effect of, okay, I could potentially do more due to the creatine, but I'm also now lacking hydration a lot, and this now also would maybe often become a problem. So one has this contrary effect, which then does not make it as clear as whether it is actually useful to take creatine right before the workout even. Now, there are a couple of other things as well. So one of them is the power to weight ratio. The question is, if I ingest carbs, for example, before the workout, but the carbs carry lots of water, or I do then need to additionally ingest water, which might take hours to digest, then I run into the problem that my power to weight ratio actually decreases because I just weigh more now. Now the big upside to ingesting carbs is that, so one has the power side and also the weight side of the power to weight ratio. Now I increase potentially the power side, but I also increase the weight side. The question, of course, is what is then the net result of ingesting carbs? And one might tinker with the variables, maybe have slightly less carbs and then drink more water in order to have proper hydration, and so on and so forth. With great power comes great responsibility, one could also say. Carbs, often, if I'm already kind of full, at least according to how much protein my body would need, maybe also how much fat my body would actually accept, then I often can still eat carbs. So it seems to be the case that if I have a certain level of satiety, which I could reach with a low carb or ketogenic diet, then if I additionally add carbs, then my body is like, okay, yeah, well, I'm already satiated, but if we have carbs, then let's just take them all in. Now the question is what the long-term effect of this is if I just eat more. Now, what happened in the last couple of years multiple times is that if I go the carb route, that I eventually end up fatter, but I also end up often cardiovascularly actually more fit. So last year, I actually had a period in which I slowly, basically from around 73 kilograms, slowly crept up to almost then at the peak 82 kilograms. Which is almost a 10 kilogram increase. Maybe it's 8 kilograms, maybe it's 9, maybe it's 7. Now the body fat also seemed to go up, but also at then December, basically shortly before my highest weight, I also had multiple, so I was then in February, I reached my highest VO2 max estimate of 57, and now it took me basically, for the last half year, I did not increase my VO2 max further. At least the estimate provided by Garmin. I only had it at 58 for like 2 or 3 days, but that's mostly it. So my training has, in terms of the cardiovascular training, almost stagnated now for basically months. But I also reduced my body fat. Now, of course, the question is also whether this is just. Of course, it's never just. The question is how much of a factor this is, what the weight of this factor is. So one variable would be that if I reduce just my energy intake, then my body obviously does not want to spend as much energy on the workout intensity, for example. So at a given workout duration, my body just provides less energy at a given mental intensity, let's just say. So if on the one side is the mental intensity I can control, or the mental demand I can control, and on the other side is how much my body actually supplies in terms of energy, then one could say, or at least based on my experience for myself, is that the less carbs I have, the less energy my body gives out. But also, because carbs now are kind of correlated with higher energy intake, because it seems to be the case that I can eat basically carbs on top of my otherwise satiety level, that then I just have more energy ingested otherwise anyway, which also means that then my body not only would maybe supply myself with more energy, because it actually now has been returned to its normal energy demands and supply. So energy demand and supply over a given week, for example, would be more stable, or would be more to normal, compared to maybe the energy supply from the food not being enough, essentially, otherwise, such that my body actually would reduce how much power it gives out at a certain mental demand. So maybe it's at normal, but maybe it's even so that if now I have a surplus of calories, that my body additionally wants to get rid of energy, and therefore provides even more energy for a given workout, for example, which then additionally would basically increase my performance. Now, again, going back to Thomas DeLauer, he mentioned often that, at least judged by his own experience, it seems to be the case that there is maybe a slightly less of a... So without carbs, or with lesser carbs, one might be less performative, but the workout adaptation might be slightly higher. But then, how can I measure the workout adaptation? I cannot really. So the only thing I can measure is actually the results. So I can measure how much weight I bench, I can measure how fast I run. And so if I don't improve on these metrics, which I can measure, then I cannot optimize for this. Because if I'm in a system in which the constraints aren't clear, then I just cannot optimize, because I don't know what to optimize for. So if I then instead take these metrics, like how much am I benching, then I would go the route of optimizing for these. And so if I optimize for these, then I would introduce more carbs, because then these carbs would allow me to work out at least at higher results, basically. And then also my Garmin VO2 Max estimate would maybe be more likelier to actually increase compared to hitting a workout on a Sunday at 3 in the morning, which I often now in the last couple of weeks did due to time constraints. And these workouts were like terrible. They were like zone 2 or like zone 3 runs, after which many things of my body hurt, or my legs hurt partially, some tendons, ligaments, but I don't know which are which. So my body, so it seems to be the case that my muscles did not last as long as I wanted them to, such that then the stress of the impact is actually then basically distributed more towards my tendons, ligaments, maybe also the bones, but I don't know if the bones actually can hurt. So it seems to be the case that, at least on the cardio days, that if I increase my carb intake, and additionally if I have carbs before, which then they can happen either just right before, but then if it's a sport that is very dependent on the power to weight ratio, then I might also have to keep this in mind in order to not now eat lots of carbs and then also drink lots of water, and then I can do like 10 pull-ups less. Or on the run, that I'm just much slower, because my body is just like 5 kilo heavier now, because I ate a kilogram of bread and then I drank 2 liters of water. Then it would be 3 kilos, obviously. But but let's summarize. So first of all, over the last couple of years, now there are also other variables as well, such as if I enter the fall season, the autumn season, then it begins suddenly to become colder. As it becomes colder, my sleep quality probably increases, because now I can cool my body. And the same is also true for cooling my body if overeating. So what I am thinking is that I can kind of overeat, and therefore let's say there are a couple of constraining nutrients that otherwise act as a bottleneck. If I am now at a certain nutrient profile, let's just say the nutrient profile is these 5 fingers, and they are basically as tall as from basically here to here. And these are different nutrients. There might be one nutrient that is actually not supplied sufficiently. Now, if I scale up my hand, then at an absolute level, because my body is still mostly the same, at an absolute level, but by increasing basically the caloric intake, it averages out, and the different nutrients would then average out. So if I just assume that I have a similar macronutrient or micronutrient distribution then among the increased calories, then the absolute need would be met basically with a higher margin, which then would allow me to basically unleash the otherwise constrained thing that would be constrained by this macronutrient. This could be some micronutrient. But what also this allows me to do is to kind of cool my body down, as I mentioned, and basically to reduce then my resulting caloric intake, or basically my net calories, because I have this additional tool which then is cold exposure.